The private dining room on the 32nd floor of the Fairmont Royal York smelled like money. Not the clean, abstract concept of it, but the physical reality: aged leather, cedar wood, something floral and expensive that probably had a French name nobody in the room could actually pronounce correctly. The chandelier above the long table threw soft gold light across 12 faces, all of them belonging to people who had never once in their adult lives worried about a hydro bill. Tara Sinclair had worried about hydro bills for 4 years straight. She moved through the room the way she had trained herself to move, quietly, efficiently, with the particular kind of invisibility that good service required. No unnecessary eye contact, no lingering near conversations. Refill the water glass before anyone notices it's low. Anticipate the need before the need becomes a request. She had learned all of this not from the job itself, but from watching, and she had always been very good at watching. The booking was under the name of Whitmore Group, a private equity firm that, according to the placard in the manager's office, had annual holdings somewhere in the range of $4 billion. Tara had seen the number and felt nothing in particular. Numbers that large ceased to be real. They were just syllables. At the head of the table sat the reason the number existed: Gareth Whitmore. He was 61, broad-shouldered in the way men are when they've been athletic their whole lives, and then stopped, and he wore the kind of confidence that comes not from any single achievement, but from decades of everyone around you nodding before you finish your sentence. He had a voice made for boardrooms, low, assured, with a cadence that suggested he had never once been interrupted. Tara had been serving tables at La Croix for 8 months. In that time, she had served 2 cabinet ministers, 1 retired NHL coach, and a woman who had won a Governor-General's Literary Award and tipped 17%, which Tara privately considered the most disillusioning thing she had witnessed in her adult life. The Whitmore Group dinner was a Thursday, which was typically slower, but the booking was for 12, and the menu was prix-fixe, and the wine list had been pre-selected at a level that made the sommelier visibly emotional. She brought the amuse-bouche herself: tiny ceramic spoons, trout roe and creme fraiche, and a single sprig of dill, and distributed them with the practiced efficiency that her manager, Douglas, had drilled into every server who worked the private room. 1 motion per guest, no reaching across, no audible footsteps if avoidable. She was reaching the far end of the table when she heard Whitmore's voice rise slightly, the way it does when a man is about to perform for his guests. "Do you know what separates the people in this room from the people who serve this room?" he said. Tara kept moving. She set the last spoon down in front of a young associate who had barely looked up from his phone all evening. "It's not intelligence," Whitmore continued. "I've met brilliant people who are completely ineffective. It's not even hard work. Plenty of hard workers die poor." He paused, letting the room fill with the particular anticipatory silence of people who know a punchline is coming. It's the ability to make decisions under pressure. Fast, correct decisions. That's it. That's the whole game. There was the expected ripple of agreement. A few nods. Someone laughed softly, which seemed slightly disproportionate, but that was the chemistry of rooms like this. Tara collected the empty spoons onto her tray and retreated toward the service door. She did not think about what he'd said, or rather, she thought about it the way she had learned to think about most things in the past 4 years. Briefly, at a slight remove, as though observing it through glass. She had made a decision under pressure once, a fast decision, and what she still believed was the correct one, though there were nights she wasn't entirely sure. She had been 24. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's in February, and by April, it had become clear that the progression was faster than the neurologist had initially suggested, and by June, Tara had withdrawn from her second year of her LLB at Osgood Hall Law School and moved back to Hamilton to manage the care schedule and the pharmacist appointments and the forms. There were so many forms, and the slowly increasing roster of things her mother could no longer do safely alone. She had made that decision in about 45 minutes, sitting in a Tim Hortons parking lot on the phone with her mother's doctor. She had never once described it to anyone as a decision made under pressure, because it had not felt like pressure. It had felt like the only available option, which was different. The kitchen returned her to the present. Heat, noise, the chef calling a table number, the particular organized chaos of a dinner service at full capacity. She picked up the first course, seared scallop, parsnip puree, micro herbs, and moved back through the door. The dinner progressed the way these dinners always did. The guests loosened as the wine went down. Whitmore held court through the main course, rotating through anecdotes that all shared the same underlying structure. A moment of doubt, a bold choice, a profitable outcome. His guests laughed at the right moments and asked questions that allowed him to expand, rather than redirect. Tara watched all of it from the edges of her attention while she managed the table. Pacing the wine, watching for a guest who hadn't touched their duck, quietly replacing a fork that had been dropped. It was during the cheese course that the piano came up. One of those guests, a younger woman near the middle of the table, whose place card read Kimberly and who had been the only person at the table to actually thank Tara when she brought the bread, gestured toward the upright Steinway in the corner of the room. It was decorative, mostly. Occasionally guests requested it played during cocktail hour and the restaurant brought in someone for the purpose, but tonight the bench was empty. "Gareth," Kimberly said, "I heard you play at the Sutton Gala in October. It was genuinely impressive." Whitmore waved a hand, but not with any particular conviction. "Party trick," he said. "Don't be modest. You played Chopin from memory. One nocturne." "I've been playing since I was 7. He said it the way people do when they're actively hoping someone will push back. Kimberly pushed back. "Play something." He was already rising from his chair. Tara was at the sideboard, making a note on her service sheet. She did not look up. She heard the bench scrape, heard Whitmore settle himself, heard the slow, considered way he pressed a few introductory keys as though reacquainting himself with the instrument. She recognized the performance of modesty, which was distinct from actual modesty, but had its own utility. Then he played. It was competent, more than competent, honestly. She could recognize that. His left hand was steady, the timing deliberate, and he moved through the nocturne with the practiced fluency of someone who had played it many times. The room grew quieter. A few of the guests turned to watch. There was genuine pleasure on some of their faces, which Tara noted without editorial comment. When he finished, the applause was immediate and warm. Whitmore stood and gave a slight bow that was calibrated to appear spontaneous. "Beautiful," Kimberly said, and meant it. "Music was always my backup plan," Whitmore said, returning to his seat. He reached for his wineglass. "If the finance thing hadn't worked out, could you have actually done it professionally?" someone asked. He considered this with the measured gravity of a man who has been asked this before. Probably not at the highest level. Concert performance is a different animal. Those pianists, the real ones, they've given up everything else. Obsessive from childhood, no distractions. He shook his head. "I have too much I want to do in the world." It was, Tara thought, a very elegant way to preemptively excuse oneself from a competition one hadn't entered. She moved to clear the cheese plates. "What about you?" She thought at first that she'd misheard, or that the question was directed elsewhere. She continued reaching for the nearest plate. The server Whitmore's voice. "Do you play?" She straightened slowly. Set the plate back down. 12 faces were turned toward her with varying degrees of interest, and for a moment the room held a kind of suspended quality, like a word on the tip of someone's tongue. "I'm sorry," she said. Whitmore's expression was not unkind exactly, but it had the quality of someone who's enjoying something at a slight remove. "Piano. Do you play? I'm asking everyone." Survey. A few people smiled. One man near the end seemed vaguely uncomfortable, though he said nothing. Tara looked at Whitmore for a moment. She was aware of the particular social geometry of the question, the room's amusement, the benign condescension of being singled out, the implicit performance of generosity that the question represented. "I am the kind of man who includes the staff in conversation." She understood exactly what was happening and had no particular feeling about it one way or the other. "A bit," she said. "A bit," he repeated and smiled. "Honest answer. I appreciate that." He picked up his wine, more than me, less than me, or roughly the same. She should have stopped there. The correct professional answer was something self-deprecating and non-committal that allowed him to move the conversation forward. She knew that. She had given that answer dozens of times in dozens of configurations over the past 4 years. It was part of the work. She looked at the Steinway. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't heard you play enough to say." The air in the room shifted very slightly. Kimberly's eyebrow went up. The uncomfortable man near the end of the table looked more uncomfortable. Whitmore set his glass down. He was still smiling, but the smile had acquired a different quality. Sharper, attentive. "Is that a challenge?" "It was an honest answer," Tara said. There was a silence that lasted perhaps 3 seconds, which felt considerably longer. "Sit down," Whitmore said. He nodded toward the piano. "Play something." She should have deflected. She should have said she was in the middle of service, which was true. She should have laughed gently and said she hadn't played in years, which was not true. She should have done any of the 6 or 7 things that the situation clearly called for. She looked at the Steinway again. The thing about the piano, her particular relationship with the piano, was that it had existed alongside her for her entire life in a way that was difficult to explain concisely to someone who didn't already understand it. Her grandmother had taught her on an old upright in a living room in Kitchener, starting at age 5. By 11 she was competing provincially. By 15 she had placed at the national junior level and begun studying with a teacher in Toronto who didn't take students lightly and had told Tara in the dry, unsentimental way of people who are genuinely skilled at their profession that she had real ability, which was not the same as saying she was talented. Talent was common. Ability was the thing that survived discipline and time and disappointment. She had maintained it through undergrad at McMaster, fitting practice hours around lectures and study groups and part-time work, because the piano was not a hobby, and it was not a career plan, and it was not precisely an ambition. It was just part of the architecture of who she was, and removing it would have required something structural to give way. She set her service tray on the sideboard. "For how long?" she said. Whitmore blinked. "Pardon? How long should I play?" He seemed genuinely uncertain for a moment, which was possibly the first genuine uncertainty he had displayed all evening. "Play a full piece," he said. "Whatever you like." She walked to the piano. She was aware of the room watching her in the particular way it was watching, the polite expectation, the slight undercurrent of amusement, the waiting. She pulled out the bench. She sat down and adjusted it without looking at the keys, which was a habit she had never broken, the adjustment done entirely by feel and posture. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment. She thought about what to play. Not for long. There was really only one honest answer. She began. The piece was the first movement of Schumann's Fantasie in C major. She had learned it at 17 and returned to it so many times over the subsequent years that it had become, in a sense, a document of her. Every fingering decision made and remade, every tempo adjusted and reconsidered, the whole architecture of it mapped not just in memory, but in the muscles of her hands. It was not a showy piece in the way that some repertoire is showy. It did not announce itself. It began quietly, almost tentatively, with a long melodic line in the right hand that asked a question it would spend the next several minutes approaching, circling, and ultimately answering in a way that was not quite resolution, but something deeper and less tidy than resolution. She played. Somewhere around the second minute, she became aware that the room had gone very quiet. Not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for something to be over. A different quality of quiet. The kind that happens when people are not quite sure what they are hearing, but understand that it is more than they expected. She registered this without altering anything. The Schumann demanded its own tempo, and she served it the way she served every table. Completely, without imposing herself, entirely present. By the time she reached the emotional center of the movement, the passage that opens upward and then pulls back, the moment the piece most fully becomes itself, she had stopped being aware of the room at all. This was the other thing about the piano that was hard to explain to someone who didn't already know it. At a certain point, it stopped being performance and became something closer to thought. The music was not a thing she was doing. It was a thing she was having. She reached the end of the movement and let the last chord settle into the room. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She looked at the far wall, where a small landscape painting, Georgian Bay, she thought, or somewhere like it, hung in a frame that was probably older than Whitmore Group itself. Then she stood, straightened her apron, and returned to the sideboard to retrieve her tray. The room was still quiet. Whitmore was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him all evening, unmediated, without the ambient performance, that had accompanied everything else he'd done since she'd first entered the room. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who had expected to be reflected back at himself, and had instead been shown something he hadn't anticipated. "How long have you been playing?" he said. His voice had a different quality, quieter. 26 years, Tara said. Kimberly made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp, something in between. "You played competitively," Whitmore said. It was not a question. "Yes, and you're—" He stopped. The pause was brief but visible, the moment before a man who is accustomed to asking direct questions calculates whether this particular direct question is appropriate. "You're a server." "I am," she said. At the moment. She picked up 2 cheese plates and moved toward the door to the kitchen. "Wait." His voice stopped her, but gently. She turned. He was still looking at her with that unguarded expression, and she could see him working through something, not embarrassment, exactly. Because merely experienced simple embarrassment, but something adjacent to it. A recalibration. "What are you studying?" he said. "Or what were you studying?" "Law," she said. "Osgood. I took a leave of absence 4 years ago. Family circumstances." She did not elaborate, and he did not push. "Are you going back?" She had been asked this question before, by different people in different tones, some of them sympathetic, some of them merely curious, and a few, she suspected, asking it less as inquiry than as a kind of implicit judgment. The question itself encoding the assumption that taking a leave was the same as giving up. She had learned to have a neutral answer ready. But something about the way he asked it, quietly, without the performance that had surrounded everything else, made her pause before she gave it. "I plan to," she said, which was the truth, the plain, unglamorous, ongoing truth of it. He nodded, not the boardroom nod of a man acknowledging a point he doesn't fully accept, but something quieter. The Schumann, he said. Fantasie, first movement. Yes, I attempted that piece about 15 years ago, he said. I gave up on it in 3 weeks. He said it plainly, without any of the self-deprecating armor that had cushioned his earlier mentions of his limitations. It requires something I don't have. Tara looked at him for a moment. It requires what all the hardest pieces require, she said. Time you can't bill to anyone. Kimberly laughed at that, openly, warmly, the laugh of someone who has just heard a thing said well. Whitmore smiled too, and it was, for the first time that evening, a smile without a calculation behind it. What's your name? He said. Tara Sinclair. He nodded again, as though filing it. Thank you, Miss Sinclair, he said. For the cheese and for the Schumann. She inclined her head slightly, the way she always did, and went through the door to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard the table begin to speak again, softly at first, and then in the normal register of 12 people finishing a dinner. She set the plates down in the return station and stood for a moment in the particular noise of the kitchen. The exhaust fans, the expediter calling something, the clatter of the dishwasher starting a new cycle. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was one thing she could say about the past 4 years. She had not once lost the steadiness. You carry what you can carry. You put it down somewhere safe when you need to use your hands for something else. And when you pick it up again, if you've been careful about where you set it, it is still exactly what it was. Douglas appeared at her elbow with the dessert mise en place. Ready for the last course? Yes, she said, and picked up her tray and went back in. The room was warm and golden, and full of people who would go home tonight to their particular versions of a life that Tara did not have and did not, at this particular moment, especially want. She served the dessert, dark chocolate tart, sea buckthorn, a tuile that the pastry chef had been quietly proud of all week, with the same care she brought to every course. She refilled the coffee. She brought the mignardises. She stood at the sideboard and waited with the calm of someone who has learned that waiting is not passive, that all the useful things in a person's life require a long patience, and that patience is not the absence of wanting things, but the ability to want them without letting the wanting make you clumsy. When the guests finally rose from the table, Kimberly was the last to leave. She paused at the door and turned back to Tara. I hope you get back, she said simply. To law school. I will, Tara said, and she meant it the way she always had, not as aspiration, not as hope exactly, but as something she had set down 4 years ago in a specific place, with care, knowing she would come back to it. Not if, not eventually, when. The door closed behind Kimberly, and Tara began to clear the table.